For as long as mankind remembers, the world has functioned on the basic principle of might is right. If you were a powerful state that only wanted to acquire a piece of land that belonged to another state, you were legally permitted, rather obligated to oppress, enslave, murder, maim, and loot people of that state. The law of the land stated that the war you were waging was a just war and that might made everything right. Legal revolutions do not end with the passing of a law, they begin with them. To reinforce the point the court is making, a law written down on a legal document and signed duly by multiple parties does not end a crime, it simply outlaws it. Hey everyone, this is Rohit Rana. You're watching Leisure Martini, and today I'm going to talk about the events that led to the end of the concept of war. Sure, there still are wars going on around the world, and there are internal conflicts that have ravaged countries from years. But I'll come to those later as part of this video. For now, let's look at the history of wars. Empires and nations always had the license to kill. The lives of people were dispensable when it came to gaining a few extra acres of land. Hugo Grotius, who is also considered, I think, the father of international law or something of that sort, he drafted a law that made it legally permissible for nations to enforce national policy or territorial rights by declaring war through the use of armed forces on other nations and kill thousands of people to that end. Over the subsequent centuries, as more and more lawmakers came to the fore, little changed. One of the big upgrades made to the old law that endorsed and empowered rather the use of violence was adding to the mix the law of neutrality. As per this law, as a nation that was not involved in an armed conflict between two nations, as a third party, you were bound by law to observe neutrality, which is to say, do not discriminate between the two warring parties regardless of who you thought was the aggressor and waging an unjust war between the two. Now, this did not just mean that you could not send your troops in support of one country, but you were also not permitted to trade goods that would be of assistance to any of the two countries at war. So, in addition to like murder when committed in the interests of a country was legal, this law of neutrality made everything even more unfair. Yeah, sure. The rights of this nature did undergo some changes here and there, but a ton of people got away with a ton of crime because they were committed to serve the nation. For this generation though, for our times, all of that belongs in archives and history books. Because today, this age and time is the best and the most peaceful time in human history. Despite what the world's leading intellectuals wanted to believe, the world we live in today is the most peaceful time than any other given moment in history. We don't even have a Cold War going on now. The one that followed the Second World War and lasted for nearly 3-4 decades. Remember that bipolar world where United States and Russia called all the shots? Pick any time in human history and you will find that for the people who lived through that time, armed conflicts were just a way of life. Any short period of peace had the clouds of anxiety and the fear of war, the upcoming war, looming large over it. People used to be more stressed during peacetime as opposed to when the war was going on, because the unpredictability of what was to come was nearly unbearable. In the thousands of years of civilization, states have always been at war with each other. Killing thousands without even being provoked was done just as a show of power. But the last 70 years, owing to the persistent efforts of some of the finest legal minds in history, have been revolutionary. Yeah, sure. Before you spit at your screen or before you scoff at me, to remind me of the tragedies of the scale of the Syrian war or the Cold War by Soviet Union, Germany, United States, the supposed heads of the bipolar world of that era up until the 90s, or the internal and external conflicts that continue to ravage various parts of the Middle East, even India. Let me clarify something at the outset. Here, I'm making a case that y is less than x, which is not the same thing as me implying that y is equal to 0. If you compare the scale and the frequency of wars waged before 1945 to the ones that have taken place since then until the present day, you will find y to be just a tiny little dot on the giant canvas that x is, in color red. And then you might be quick to point out that war ended because of democracy, global free trade, and nuclear weapons. But what if I told you that these are not the causes that ended war, but rather the consequences of the world without war? Because there are no wars, democracy is thriving, global free trade is thriving, nuclear weapons are being developed. So Una Hathaway's The Internationalists, that book details that one event that marked the beginning of the end of wars. As the authors put it, the outlawry of war, by the Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact of 1928. So if you are asking a question to me, how did war end? This is how it started. It all began on a hot and humid day of 27th August 1928 in Paris. Mark that date. 15 nations signed a peace pact to make war illegal. And over the course of the next 5 years, 48 more nations came aboard. As per what's known as the Paris Peace Pact or the Kellogg-Briand Pact, any country that would go to war after signing the agreement would have to bear the consequences. For example, the consequences would be global isolation, imposing of economic sanctions by other countries, giving up of their conquests, etc. Essentially, all the signatories officially renounced the use of war as an instrument of national policy, which is what it was up until that time in history. Okay, wait. Didn't the World War II, unarguably the deadliest armed conflict in the known history of mankind, happen after this peace pact? It did, right? So how in the holy hell was this pact not more useless than a white crayon? Glad you asked. So let's explore this question and its possible answer. The question again is, despite World War II, why should Peace Pact of 1928 still be considered a success? Okay, so outlawry of war was initiated on 27th August in the year 1927 or 28. It did not work at the time, but it did something else. It closed the lid on the old world order, making way for the new world order. That was as important a change in history as any. Una Hathaway, the author of the book, sums it up perfectly. She says, when seeking change, it is simply not enough to pass a law and expect everyone to comply. No political endeavor escapes the need to make laws binding through governmental power. Legal revolutions do not end with the passing of a law, they begin with them. To reinforce the point the court is making, a law written down on a legal document and signed duly by multiple parties does not end a crime. It simply outlaws it. This outlawry has then to be enforced and reinforced in the real world until everyone, especially the perpetrators and criminals, start to not just notice but also fear the law. That's when the complying will happen. Now, this Peace Pact set in motion a series of events that took place over the next 20 years and culminated in the castigation of the Axis powers that comprised of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And more importantly, it led to the inception of United Nations. These events, which ensued while the World War II was underway, were empowered at every step of the way by scholars and dedicated to peace individuals who spent days, nights, months, years, and decades to draft a host of treaties and legal documents, each an improvement over its predecessor. Hirsch Lauterpacht, or maybe I'm butchering his name, but this guy was he was one of the names who was most prominent among those who made the impact. Apart from writing a host of books, he also assisted in the prosecution of the defendants from Axis powers at the Nuremberg trials. You should read about Nuremberg trials. Now, another thing that happened that was part of this pact, or it was a follow-up action on this pact, was the outcasting of nation states that did not comply with the international law. It's still in effect in today's age and time. Over the years, one of the most successful measures in terms of its effectiveness to make nation states comply without the need to enter into an armed conflict has been this political outcasting through sanctions on the belligerent, the perpetrator. Now, this implies enforcing, in particular, trade and economic sanctions on countries that violate the international law by invading parts of other countries. One of the most noteworthy example is of Russia invading Crimea in February of 2014. Now, the question arises, the natural question arises, what exactly is outcasting in international law and politics? As I mentioned earlier, it is the isolation of national states or specific firms or even specific individuals who are responsible for violating a nation's sovereignty. So this does not necessarily apply to the entire nation state, but even to some big corporations from a specific country that is violating a nation's sovereignty in some way, some form or the other. If you bar a very specific business from running its business in your country, that does affect the whole of other nation state to which that corporation belongs. So where do you read all of it, all of what I have tried to explain here? To know more about the contributions of individuals like Hirsch Lauterpacht and what other lawyers, writers and lawmakers brought to the table in context to the Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact of Paris in 1928, and further deep dive into the history of war, get your copy of The Internationalists by Oona Hathaway and Scott J. Shapiro. In Steven Pinker's words, this book will change the way you remember the 20th century and read the news in the 21st. Subscribe to Legend Martini for your daily dose of lifestyle, movies, fashion, career, health and wellness, and everything else under the sun. Don't forget to hit the bell icon.